Assalamualaikum and good evening. In today's lab, we will be conducting lab 5, which is spinal reflexes and reaction in humans. So the objectives for this experiment is to determine and understand patellar reflex, Achilles reflex, swallowing reflex, reaction time to sight, and reaction time to touch. Without further ado, let's go.
Bro, where are you going, bro?
I'm going to do lab 5.
What are you going to do there?
So lab 5 is about human reflexes and reaction time.
Human reflexes? What's that?
So reflex is a quick and automatic response that occurs in human. It can occur whether you are conscious or unconscious.
I see.
So it usually happens to help to protect the body. And it occurs to special system which we call central nervous system, which is divided into two, which is first the brain and the second one is spinal cord. So the spinal cord allows the body to react quickly, while the brain usually involves a bit of thinking before we do the action. So the reflex arcs is divided into three, which is sensory neuron, interneuron, and motor neuron. So what is that? So sensory neuron, which is known as the efferent, it detects stimulus and sends the signal to the central nervous system. And the interneuron, or we call the integration system, is at the spinal cord where it processes the signal and decides a response. The final one is the motor neuron, which we call the efferent. So the efferent send the signal from the spinal cord to the muscle or glands to produce a response.
I see. So, where are you going now?
So I'm going to do the lab. You want to follow me?
Yes.
Let's go.
Guys, is it just me or am I the only one who bored right now? We don't have any class or lab today. What should we do?
I have an idea. Why don't we play there or there?
Wow, a nice idea. Let's go!
Hi, now we go through the experiment 5.1, which is the patellar reflex. First, we need to have the subject sitting on a chair with a leg crossed, where the upper leg should be relaxed. Okay, now we need to feel the large tendon below the midline of the kneecap. Using a small tendon hammer, gently strike the tendon below the kneecap. Observe a sharp extension of the leg. Now, repeat the experiment with a subject reading a book loud and then strike the tendon again. Compare with the previous knee jerk. Repeat once again, but this time the subject should deliberately try not to give the response. So question 1. How can the large sudden movement observed in the large while reading loud during testing be explained? So the larger response occurs because the subject is distracted. When a person focuses, brain, conscious or spinal reflexes decrease. The reflex arc in spinal cord become more sensitive, which is the hyperexcitable, resulting in more dramatic knee jerk. Question 2. Is the reflex affected the subject deliberately attempts to suppress any response? Explain your observation. So observation, the leg will likely still kick even if the subject tries to keep it still. The reason is because the signal does not need to travel to the brain to produce a movement. The conscious mind has very little control over the immediate reactions.
Hi everyone! Let's begin experiment 5.2. First, the subject needs to remove both shoes. In this experiment, the only material used is a small tendon hammer. Next, ask the subject to kneel on a chair with their feet hanging freely over the edge. Make sure the foot is relaxed. Then, gently tap the Achilles tendon using the tendon hammer. Repeat the stimulation at approximately 2 taps per second, and that's the end of the experiment. Hello.
First, swallow the saliva in your mouth cavity and immediately afterwards try to swallow again. As you can see, it was hard. After that, drink a sip of water and immediately try to swallow again. It was easier to swallow for the second time.
So experiment 5.4, which is reaction time to sight, is to measure the reaction time of subject in response to a visual stimulus. So the materials and apparatus needed in this experiment is only 2 stopwatches which we use on our phones. So the procedure for this experiment is both experimenter and subject should have a stopwatch each and start it simultaneously. Then the experimenter will stop his stopwatch, and as soon as the subject sees this, the subject will stop his stopwatch, and the time lapse between both experimenter and subject will be measured, which is recorded in the table. Then the experiment is repeated 10 times to calculate the average reaction time.
Finally, it's our turn. Come join Sarah and Adin. Let's go! For experiment 5, both the experimenter and subject should have a stopwatch each. Second, start both watches simultaneously. The subject should close her eyes. The experimenter presses her watch to stop and simultaneously steps on the subject's foot. The subject then presses her stopwatch to stop.
So, next we are going to use a thread to measure the length of the nerve pathway between the point where the stimulus is received, which is the foot, to the responding body part, or the finger used to press the switch. We also need to make sure that the measurement follow anatomical paths of the nerve signal in the following sequence. And lastly, we are going to use a ruler or a measuring tape to measure the length of the thread used in the procedure 5.
For table 5.2, which is the time lapse between the experimenter and the subject's action, the average reaction time of subject to touch is 5.01 seconds. For table 5.3, the analysis of the reaction time and results, we can get the length of nerve pathway between foot, receptor and the finger, which is the effector, is 2.5 meter, while the speed is 0.50 meter per second.
So here are a few ethics that you need to follow to undergo this experiment. First one is consent. So make sure your subject is agreed to participate in your experiment.
Second, for the ACUS and swallow test, we need to ensure the subject is comfortable with settings. Lastly, we should conduct the experiment without any force. That means no injuries and no accident occurs. That's all.
So there are a few precautions that has to be followed throughout when conducting the experiment. So the first one is ensure that the experiment is conducted gently without the use of excessive force to avoid the subjects from injuring and avoid any accidents.
Second, accuracy for the patellar reflex. That means the result must truly reflect the person's actual condition.
And lastly, we need to ensure that the subject are in the correct position. This need to be done to make sure that the procedure are done smoothly. So that's all, guys.
To conclude, these experiments demonstrate that human nervous system uses both automatic reflexes and conscious reactions to respond to stimuli. Spinal reflexes like the patella and Achilles reflex occur almost instantly because the signal only travels to the spinal cord. Factors such as distraction or fatigue can further change these reaction speeds. Overall, the results prove that reflexes are essential for fast, protective movement, while reaction time vary based on the complexity of the task.